So one of our self-enclosed seams is the flat felled seam. It starts off with wrong sides together, and we are going to sew at our 1/2 inch seam line. Get everybody aligned here, and 1/2 inch. Now we'll go press. Okay, so let's marry the seams. And now we have to do some trimming. I'm not going to press the seam open, but I'll trim away 3/8 of one of the seam allowances, and it kind of that's determined by which way I want the stitching to fall. So if I want my second row of stitching to be over here, then I'll trim seam allowance from this one. So on your samples, it doesn't really matter, but on a garment, you know, front to back, which side, up and down, all those things would matter. I'm just gonna trim 2 1/8 is really what we're going for. So leaving 1/8, in the case of our 1/2 inch, that's removing 3/8. Then on the seam allowance we've left, we're going to press under 1/4 inch, so it gets pressed kind of in half. Looks like maybe I left a little more than 1/8 on that other seam, but that's okay. So with your 1/2 inch stitch from the edge, you're really just bringing the remaining seam allowance over to your stitches. And one final press will be to send all that to one side. So we've trimmed one seam allowance and we're wrapping it with the other. Now we'll go stitch. It is good when you're doing these types of seams to go in the same direction with both stitches. So this was my top the first time, it's my top the second time. And now I'm just going to stitch right along this folded edge at the 1/4 inch. And I want to make sure that I'm keeping things, you know, taut and flat. I don't want any of this lower fabric to kind of creep under, because then I'll be catching too much. So just keep it right nice and smooth and flat. So hopefully you're noticing that the stitching shows, it's visible. Both rows of stitching actually are visible on the right side of the sample. So we got to make those nice and straight stitches. Go press it one more time to set it. And I will double check that things are smooth and nothing's poofing up over here. It's all good. and it's done.